Right now, though, I'm delighted to be joined by the former leader of the Conservative Party. That's Sir Iain Duncan Smith. Good morning to you, Sir Iain.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Just quickly on this issue of this march being planned, yet another one every Saturday in London. We've seen for quite some weeks now a march, the pro-Palestinian march. Do you think that march should be banned completely? Do you think they should ask it to take place on a different day? Do you think that march should just be not allowed around the Cenotaph? Where are you on this?
I'm for completely banning it from anywhere around London. And by the way,
anywhere in London.
Well, marches, because on the Sunday, many of our constituents will be holding remembrance parades ourselves. So it's not just the Cenotaph. The fact is that we're having one up in London. Others will be having them all over the country. So this is the point. It's not just a London affair. This is all over the country. So police need to make it very clear that any attempt to interrupt those very solemn proceedings will be dealt with very severely.
But Sir Iain, this protest plan is their plan for Saturday, Armistice Day, one of the most sacred days. You know, this is the 11th of November. This is when, you know, the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month. We mark this moment when finally we saw the end of World War I, and that this is the time that we choose to say thank you and commemorate and remember the people who lost their lives. So we could do things like go on a march. This won't actually interrupt, we're told, the actual Remembrance Day service on Sunday. Although, again, I don't see how it doesn't interrupt and affect the security preparations for that event. But the big concern would be that we see, I don't know, what if someone throws red paint all over the Cenotaph the day before or something like that? Is there an argument that it should go ahead? People have a right to protest. People died for the right for us to be on the streets and protest. We don't have to like what people are protesting about. We don't have to agree with the people, but that it shouldn't take place in this one particular area of London.
No, I'm stronger than that, I'm afraid. This is not one day. Bear in mind that the Cenotaph session will be held on the 12th. On the 11th, I and many others will be also wreath laying in some solemnity to commemorate on the 11th at different locations. This is a weekend. It starts on Friday and it doesn't end until after the Cenotaph on Sunday. The Cenotaph is the culmination. It's not the beginning.
Okay.
And I just want to make it very clear, by the way, we're not just commemorating the end of the First World War. We're commemorating all the lives that are lost from the end of the First World War. 1,000 British soldiers were killed in Northern Ireland, and I served there. And I lost a friend who has never come back. So for me, this is a personal issue. Yeah. I just think that all those soldiers, myself included, we stood up for the rights that they are exercised. But that does allow us to say, on this one day when we commemorate those who stood up against tyranny and for those rights, that they themselves should step back and let us have that period so that we can do so in peace, because that's exactly what we need to do. And they have plenty of time to protest any other days, you know, that their rights to protest go on, although not to carry Hamas flags. But they have plenty of time to do that. They don't have to do it on that weekend. And I think that weekend is pretty sacred to most of us.
I think you're right, it is. I think it's such an important day in our calendar. And I can always remember, even when my child was really little, that was a time, you know, we would stop and we would pay our respects, and it was very moving, and it was something I wanted her to learn about, because as we have learned over recent years, and you've been a fantastic soldier on that front in terms of getting off some of our freedom, well, most of our freedoms back and trying to protect them in the future. You know, these freedoms didn't just happen out of the blue. They were fought for. People died for these freedoms, and you have to fight for them every generation again to keep those freedoms. What do you make, by the way, of people who very much sort of the virtue signalling left, who've been telling us for years that you know, words are violence, and that so someone saying, for instance, me saying, you know, I'd refuse to accept that a man can become a woman, and that somehow that is a terrible, offensive, violent assault on somebody and something for which I should be arrested. And yet people on that side of the debate supporting people basically walking on our streets accusing Israel of war crimes, and that may well be. We may well see in the future those accusations are held up, accusing them of genocide, holding up some really blatantly pro-Hamas signs, shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is basically calling for the annihilation of Israel, a Hamas call. What do you make of the fact that they don't seem to be remotely perturbed, these people, by the fact that many people in our Jewish community in this country feel that, and certainly friends of mine feel this way, that central London and others where these marches take place isn't safe for them and their children when these are taking place. Getting on the tube, we've seen again and again footage from people shouting slogans on the tube, people feeling intimidated by that. Why do you think they seem to have one rule for one group of people and another rule for the others?
Well, it's always been the case that I think that some of these uber-liberal left, they're the least liberal at times in the world, because, of course, you just mentioned the whole business, for example, of the trans debate. They want the right to speak, but once a woman stands up and says she doesn't agree with that, then they cancel her, they dump on her, they go after them. I mean, so you can't have it both ways. You can't have it one way and not the other. The fact is, you have the right to speak. We accept that. I don't agree with what they're saying. For example, the idea of having a ceasefire is almost impossible under things like, who do you have a ceasefire with? Hamas has made it very clear that they won't have any ceasefire and they won't abide by it. So what is it? Israel stops and Hamas carries on shooting. And the second thing is Israel's made it very clear for the, I think very clear that if, they want to get in humanitarian aid, quite legitimately, then Hamas should hand back the hostages, in which case then they will have that humanitarian aid. And of course, Hamas refused to do that. So I don't know anybody on these marches that's been going, Hamas, hand back the hostages. Hamas, stop hiding behind civilians in hospitals and in blocks of flats.
We've just seen actually some of the footage we're playing out from one of the marches, someone going, stop bombing children. Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. Stop butchering children, cutting their heads off in Israel on October the 7th. I find it fascinating that people don't feel that was something they should protest about as well. We should really be joining that Palestinian march, saying, free Palestinians from Hamas.
Well, this is the whole point. This started because Hamas decided to go and murder 1,400, but they didn't just murder them, by the way. What they did was they cut their heads off and then burnt the bodies. Now, this was deliberately to remind the Jewish people, the Israelis particularly, of the Holocaust. There was no accident in the fact that they were burning bodies and dismembering them. It's very much to remember what happened to them at the Holocaust and what was coming for them. That was the whole point. This chant from the river to the sea, Hamas and Hezbollah the other day, the head of Hezbollah made it very clear what it means. It means to rid Palestine of the Jews. So this is, where the balance needs to be held. Those who run out and just grab the flags because protest is a good thing or they think it's terrible, absolutely. Our hearts go out to those who have lost loved ones in the course of all of this. Absolutely. But for Israel, who is always in a precarious position, the idea that they've had 1,400 massacred and will go on, have rockets fired at them every day of the week, and that these people constantly raid them, this has become intolerable because you can't have any peace agreement whilst terrorist organizations run that process. And actually, to be honest with you, the Abraham Accords that were going to be delivered soon, which would have included many of the Middle Eastern countries, having an agreement with Israel to sort of normalize relations. This was deliberately aimed at stopping that, and it stopped it for the moment. And the key thing here is you see the hand of Iran behind this all the way. And Iran is absolutely determined to clear Israel out of Palestine. That is exactly the point. So if you are Israeli, you feel very frightened. And if you're Jewish here in London, I have a sister-in-law who is, she's never felt more frightened about going on the street, she said to me, than she has in the last couple of weeks because of this terrible, spiteful anger. I think it's time we calm down.
Well, let me talk about that, because we've had 11 councillors in Burnley, including the leader of the council, and we're going to be talking to him, resigning from the Labour Party, basically saying that Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, he's not calling for a ceasefire. He's very much saying the same line as the government, indeed as the American government. They're saying, along with many other councillors who resign, we normally even front benchers as well as backbench, sort of left-wing, sort of Corbynista MPs on Labour benches, saying they want Keir Starmer to call for a ceasefire. Who benefits from a ceasefire?
I want a humanitarian pause to get humanitarian aid in. Everybody wants that. We all want, at the end of it, to have no more fighting and no more killing, because this is terrible. Any person that served knows what that looks like. But you have to deal with the realities in front of you. And I keep saying this to people. Who are you going to have a ceasefire with? Hamas is a terrorist organization that has vowed itself to clear the Jews out of Palestine. The second part of it is they have made it very clear that they will not abide by a ceasefire, that they are determined to continue to try and kill Israelis. So who do you have a ceasefire with? And they have an opportunity to pause this by handing back the hostages, but they won't do it. And many of those who haven't fled from northern Gaza is because they are being used as shields, which is what Hamas does all the time. And all the records of who's died, etc., all come through Hamas hands. So let's be very careful about who you have a ceasefire with. Of course, we'd all love to have a ceasefire, but it's not feasible to have a ceasefire with a terrorist organization that doesn't intend to abide by it.
Sir Iain Duncan Smith, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much.